Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega, David Joseph, and Trix Slattery. And our topic for today is about humans compared to other animals related to the free will thing. Because free will, as discussed, is usually talking about human will, human free will. Like there's always that word human attached to free will, that humans have a free will is what people have taught, but other animals don't. They're just biology and environment. They just go by instinct. And that's what I've heard all my life too, growing up, that humans are special. They're different from every other animal in this way. And so perhaps we should examine this and examine, well, okay, prove it that humans are different than other animals. How can you demonstrate that they're different than these other animals? And even though all animals are different, what they're claiming is that, well, humans have this ability of free choice or free will, that makes them responsible and credit or blameworthy for their actions, even though we don't credit or blame other animals for what they do.
And I think this ties into people thinking that because they can rationalize and they can think and do logic, and other animals don't really have those capabilities, that somehow that puts them on a level that allows them to have this free will ability, which is kind of a bizarre thing, and where we have to get into, I think, a little bit when we talk about this.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that some humans can't really think and rationalize and all those things that they consider uniquely human. I mean, there's variations on intelligence and abilities between animals of the same species as well. So I
Right.
don't, so what's interesting is I don't think somebody can look to certain features of, well, this animal can perform a task like math or compose music and like you can't use that necessarily um as some way of trying to prove free will
Well,
because
right. The question is, how does having that ability, the ability to use logic or reason or whatever, how does that make someone more free um, than an animal, for example? And it doesn't really, obviously. We would say it doesn't, but this is what we kind of got to get through to people is these capabilities that humans have aren't really special capabilities that go above and beyond what other animals have in regards
Well,
to freedom.
what about what about if someone said that human beings have the ability to kind of think ahead a bit, and so they can kind of like make decisions for tomorrow, like right now.
Yeah,
You know,
that
Right.
say
some philosophers refer to intentions. That's how they frame it. But think about it, like whether we make a decision about the immediate present or about a week or a year from now, how does that, how is extending into the future, grant a special ability?
well, yeah, it's probably not a special ability, but I'm not sure if there's any animal that can kind of think to
Oh, I see
next
what you're
week,
saying.
perhaps. But I
Right.
don't know because then you have animals like squirrels that don't they like they collect nuts and stuff, don't they?
that's a good example,
Right.
David. They collect nuts, like they a lot of animals collect food for the winter. Like they collect food, like ants do that, you know, and bees do that. Their honey is their food that's supposed to get them through the winter when there's not plants around. So yeah, you could say that a lot of other animals think and plan ahead. So it's not like that's a human only capability.
Though people would probably um, categorize that as instinct, whereas they categorize people thinking ahead as actually thinking ahead, actually, deliberating on a future event. So it is slightly different. The problem is neither really grant a higher level of freedom in regards to what a person is thinking. So, but that's where I think that a lot of the confusion is lying, is the fact that um, people do have these capacities that other animals don't have, and they somehow equate that to some higher capacity of freedom.
Yeah, and Trick, maybe we need to go into that. Well, what is this instinct that people are talking about?
Well, actually, like I think in the past, the debate about humans was, was our behavior the result of nature or nurture? Genetics or environment. And now we conclude that it's a combination. But I think more and more, I think we're concluding that much of the behavior we formerly attributed to our upbringing, how we were raised, our environment, is actually genetic. So this instinctual component of humans is actually much more pronounced than we thought, let's say, decades ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. A lot of genetic facts are coming to light in regards to behavioral science. So I think they still say that it's a combination of both. I think that's the consensus among scientists, is that it's a combination of genetics and environment that cause these things. But that's the thing. It's not any more free with an environment cause than it is a genetic cause. So
From what I understand, genetics can give you the predisposition, but it will take an environmental trigger in order to kind of activate that predisposition.
yeah, for some of them, like you have where you have a gene that actually activates due to the environmental conditions that cause the gene to activate. So
And you could also make the case that, like, behaviors just as automatic as breathing are actually instinctual. You know, they don't require any thought or intention. I mean, the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah, that's a good example. There's all kinds of things that we don't consciously or intentionally do, such as breathing and farting and all kinds of interesting things that we do that without even thinking about it. And the immune system that fights off diseases, the white blood cells, and all that kind of neat stuff. We don't have to think and plan and do this stuff intentionally, because if that was the case, like, we would forget to breathe. Like, we would just forget to breathe and die.
yeah, well, I think that most people would say that those are the things that we don't do freely, whereas the other things are the things we do freely. So, and in fact, I think a lot of people would say that, for example, children don't have free will, but then as you get older, you get free will somehow, um, because of the reasoning capabilities or something like that. So I don't know how they get to these conclusions, but I think that's where a lot of it's stemming from.
Well, what's interesting about it is, George, he has a chapter and an episode about this, like asking when a child gains free will illuminates the problem. And it's like my favorite chapter of his book, because it's just like, yeah, when does a child magically get this free will thing that people claim?
Right, right.
So what you were saying, Trick, is people have this idea like, okay, well, sure, there's some things that we're not free, some things that we don't choose, such as our breathing and our nervous system and all that. So they have they have the things that we don't choose, but then they think there's another category of things that we do choose, and so they act like, yeah, they're separate categories. And so then I guess we kind of could use the George Ortega's two-step refutation, like ask them to think of a choice they consider to be freely willed, and then ask them if it was caused or uncaused.
I mean, this is the big enigma, guys. I mean, like, you know, the refutation of free will couldn't be simpler. It couldn't, in other words, like, if things are caused, free will is impossible. If things are uncaused, free will is impossible. So almost kind of like a bigger mystery than, like, this whole free will thing is like how people don't get it. How academics, PhDs, people who have actually written books on this topic just, fail to appreciate this very powerful, simple explanation.
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't be any simpler. I agree there, because I mean, it makes so much sense, that if things are caused, there's a causal regression that goes back before you exist, you're conceived and anything. But even and if things are uncaused, then it doesn't matter when they happen. They still mess up the idea that you caused an uncaused event, so you can't freely will an uncaused event either.
Back on the animal thing, it would be kind of interesting to see like a poll of people that thought certain animals had free will. Like, for example, great apes that aren't humans, or dolphins or anything like that. I would like to see that poll.
You
Just
know
to
what's
see.
interesting? Like for decades, for perhaps over a century, people have kind of like said, well, other animals don't have free will, but we do. And now I think like a few years ago, there was this experiment. Because they're trying to now go into the lab to demonstrate that in the lab they can like prove free will. So they actually this experiment, you know, proposes that by some kind of mechanism, I forget the exact, whatever, that somehow fruit flies have free will. I don't know if you guys have encountered that. So
Oh
like
no.
so they're basically going from like no animals have free will to like, well, even fruit flies have it. I mean, it's like, it's a great irony how like, the the um the attempt to save free will just kind of like would controvert their entire thinking about animals.
Yeah, I think I saw. I don't remember a fruit fly one, but I think I remember a worm one actually. I don't remember how that went either. But it was like worms have free will. I was like, what?
Yeah, well, what's interesting about this, guys, is that there is a compatibilist, who commented on my blog a while. And what's interesting is that he does stand by the idea, since he's using compatibilist free will, no one's holding a gun to your head,
Right.
basically free will. So, yeah, basically, a tree has free will because it can grow and freely if no one's holding a gun to its head telling it to grow. Like,
Yeah. Well, yeah, there are a lot of compatibilists. They contrive these. I have one on my blog post right now that I'm kind of debating with. That's just contriving. You know, the typical if you can rationalize, then you have free will. If you're not constrained by like a gun to your head type of force, then you have free will. So and then I kind of bring up the whole, well, what if you have a brain tumor, or what if you have a microchip that's controlling your what you want to do, and you do what you want to do, and that's where it kind of gets confusing, you know. So it's like these type of
Well,
definitions are problematic.
about it like if you drink like, let's say, 10 cups of coffee, or have like, 6 bottles of beer or something. I mean, like, it's so simple. Like the kind of, the things that we do on a daily basis that just shift our reasoning, our thinking, our decisions. I mean, it really is part of our everyday life, that all these, environmental influences.
yeah, it's very interesting because you would like if you know anything about how alcohol, for example, or other drugs would affect someone's mood, and if you change someone's mood, you change their behavior, it changes their thinking process. I mean, why do people give people medication for depression? It has an effect on your brain, and how it affects your brain will have an effect on your behavior, on your thoughts. And so it's like this blows the traditional idea of free will, like that. At least I was taught this. Basically, well, your free will is contained in your spirit. It's not a part of your body, so it can choose freely no matter what.
Yeah, and animals don't have that special.
Yeah, and you know what, Trick? Related to that, I was always really upset about that. The whole, if you grow up in this idea that, oh well, you humans go to heaven or hell, but well, these other animals, well, they just stop existing after they die because they don't have a soul or spirit. And I'm like, there have been some people who have left the faith over that issue. I'm not even
Yeah.
kidding. There are some people who say, I'm not going to any afterlife if I can't take my dog with me. And so I always found that the most offensive to animals thing. It's kind of a side note, but yeah, there's still this idea, because our topic is animals, this idea that there's a difference between humans, that they have something other animals don't.
And of course, even if they go there, that, like, fine, we have a soul that animals don't have, that doesn't have free will either. Because like, basically the soul would be subject to causality. And we wouldn't have been able to have created our souls. So I mean, yeah, I mean, like, again, like the distinction, trying to distinct between us and other animals, it doesn't help. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, George, is that Now, some people, they just dismiss that and say, oh, there's no evidence of a soul or whatever, that kind of thing. However, what I do is, even though I dismiss the idea of a soul, I dismiss the idea of random acausality, what I still like to do, and it's good for us to do, is even if it were true, it doesn't help their case for free will.
And again, so like, going back to kind of like, the childhood thing, when does a child gain free will? Again, the question with animals, so like, yeah, so basically, just as with the childhood, like, when does a child gain free will? Historically, evolutionarily, basically, when did, organisms evolve? Because we all evolved from single-celled organisms. At what point during that timeline did we, obtain this extra quality called free will?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like philosophers like Dennett and stuff like that say that free will has evolved. It's like there's this whole book, Freedom Evolved, right? So he thinks that we've evolved the capacities to have free will, but it's a compatibilist definition that doesn't have anything to do with the feeling that people actually feel that they possess or what they're raised believing. So
Yeah, and that sounds like a very interesting book. So one of these days I plan to read Freedom Evolves. I already know I'm going to disagree with it, but
yeah,
for the
that's
laughter I'm going to get from it.
I
No,
was just
no.
going to say he has a lecture on YouTube that you can watch for free. So I mean, it's just as confusing as the book to me.
Maybe I'll just watch the lecture because it's a lot funnier hearing that guy talk.
And we should do an episode on that, because a lot of times we're kind of like, presenting our case for why free will can't exist, whereas like a lot of times we should go on the offensive by simply attacking these nonsensical, defenses like evolution. Because like, we could easily point to a statement or a paragraph where then it says, and this is where evolution, allows for free will, which of course has to be completely nonsensical.
And what's really strange about it, George, is evolution is already a convoluted subject because there's so many misconceptions. People talking about random mutations, which kind of throws people off. I still get the idea of natural selection. It's not that hard, but one thing I do understand is that it's all constrained by the survival. If you don't survive long enough to reproduce, then your species dies out. I mean, so basically, the biology and environment is completely what evolution is about. There's causal explanations for why a certain creature had to evolve a certain way in order to adapt to an environment.
yeah, and people still confuse this whole idea of unpredictability as well. Like I just looked up the fruit fly thing, George, and the first sentence of it, and this is in New Scientist, so it's a scientific
I know.
magazine. So it says fruit flies have free will even when deprived of any sensory input to react to. The zigzags of their flight reveal an intrinsic, non-random, yet still unpredictable decision-making capacity. If evolution has furnished humans with a similar capacity, this could resolve one of the long-standing puzzles of philosophy. So right there, they're basically saying that it's the unpredictability of the fruit flies that gives them free will. And this is in Scientific American, or not Scientific
Uh,
American, New
New
Scientist. It's
scientists.
like,
Oh, that hurts. God.
Oh man, this is so sad. I mean, it's really sad for them to see some new scientist or whatever you said the name of that was, magazine, saying that fruit flies have free will. So then they're going to say, "Oh, fruit flies have libertarian free will," because they're not going to read the article. They're just going to glance over it and ignore it. Some of them might read it, but they're going to think, "Yeah, fruit flies have libertarian free will," and like, ugh.
but
Yeah,
it's
we got to do
yeah.
an episode on predictability, on how it's done, whether something is either predictable or not. It's still nonetheless causal. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for example, I had no idea earlier that Jamie was going to leave Skype and that was going to end the group call. I had no idea. There was no way I could have predicted that that was going to happen. But there's causal explanations, I'm sure. For example, Jamie told us that he was tired, and so he wasn't going to be part of our podcast. But it's like, just because I can't predict what, like, say George is going to email me before he emails me doesn't mean it's random. doesn't mean it's not cause. Well, duh.
I was at a meetup yesterday. It was like on relativity, Einstein's relativity. I think it's the 150th or 100th anniversary of whatever this general whatever. And like even these physicists, they amazed me because like much of the meeting was about like equations, and I it was like a foreign language to me. But
Oh,
these
okay.
guys would argue, for like this inherent unpredictability in nature, not recognizing that like it's really just a matter of just like a limitation in our information. In other words, like yeah, fine, we may never be able to get all the information for various reasons, but that doesn't mean that theoretically, in principle, things are not predictable. One would have to actually have all information. But the other thing is just that they equate unpredictability with a causality, or at least with the opening for free will. And so yeah, it's another example of how like these academics who I guess they're very specialized in their like these guys are mathematicians basically, and so like it just doesn't allow them to expand beyond that discipline to more basic understandings that are not math based, they're logic based.
Yeah, especially relativity. Einstein himself was like a hardcore determinist, and he's the one that derived these general and special relativity equations. So I don't know. It's kind of bizarre that they would go there with that. But yeah, because it's because of they're unpredictable. But Einstein himself knew that it has nothing to do with whether something is unpredictable. It has to do with whether it's causal. So whether everything has a variable to it.
Right. And what's interesting about it, guys, is that the fact that we can predict so much is where we get the idea of cause and effect.
It almost sounds like a kind of God of the gaps argument, kind of free will of the gaps, so to speak.
Absolutely, that's as much as they have. They say like basically they can't explain how free will can logically occur. So you're right. They say, well, maybe not everything is caused. Not fully thinking it through.
Right, or they just say that the unpredictability itself somehow grants free will, which that doesn't make any sense. They don't understand that unpredictability has to do with a knowledge. It doesn't have to do with what actually is. So it's this conflation between epistemology and ontology. Which is the study of knowledge compared to the study of what is or what exists. So and people conflate these two and mesh them together, when in reality we're talking about what is, um, what in fact is. Like when someone says I have free will, they're talking about what is. They're not talking about what they believe or what they don't have knowledge of. So
Yeah, and whenever somebody doesn't have knowledge of a certain thing, well, then they have the God of the gaps, the free will of the gaps, the acausal randomness of the gaps, and they
right.
keep doing that because what they basically have is a non-explanation, an explanation that doesn't explain anything.
Right, and it's usually a logically incoherent explanation as well. So they don't recognize, they don't see the actual problem with what they're thinking, and they just see that there's a gap there, so they're filling it, even with something illogical, basically.
Yeah, and one thing that's kind of interesting is that's like saying that, okay, let's say the baseball team is playing baseball, okay? And so the pitcher throws the ball to the batter, and he doesn't know, he may not be able to predict whether or not the batter will hit the ball. But does that mean that the hitting of the ball by the bat is uncaused?
Right, right, of
That's
course.
about as sportsy as I'll ever get. Because I'm not into sports.
Yeah. So animals, no free will,
Yeah, basically. I mean,
and
because
and humans are animals.
And we're going to
Humans
yes,
also
are
have to address, we'll have to address kind of like some people like either claim that free will was or is an emergent property that like we didn't have like, the evolution thing, or that some people may suggest that well, we don't have it now. I've heard people say that like, but if you become really enlightened, I actually heard two MDs who came to my meetup say this. You actually can like obtain free will by becoming more enlightened. And I mean, my God, so we've got to address the idea that like we can never have free will. It's just like conceptually impossible.
Right. The more enlightened you become, the more you understand that free will is just logically incoherent. It doesn't make any sense. So,
Yeah, and what's interesting is that the more knowledge you gain, the more constrained you are. I mean, seriously, because the more knowledge you have about the world, like, sure, when you're a kid and you don't realize that cars can run you over, sure, you might run out in the street when a car is coming, when you are not yet aware of that fact. But once you are aware of that fact, you are constrained against running out in front of a car because you don't want to get hurt and you know that you'll become hurt. So the more knowledge you have, the more afraid you become of this world, and there's more things you can't do anymore.
That's a great point, Chandler. And we can like apply that. I mean, nobody has free will, but like the older a person gets, the more experience that they will have had, that formed their memory data set, and that the more powerfully, all that stuff makes free will for them impossible. For the reasoning you said, basically if we're processing more information, then that's going to like be more influences that prohibit free will.
Exactly, because it's weird because this idea that you're somehow more free because you attain more knowledge, well, that's like saying that you can like because basically you lose certain beliefs as soon as you gain knowledge that proves them false, basically. Once it's been demonstrated that something isn't true, then you can't go back to believing something's true once you already know it's false. It's kind of that's why people don't like to look at evidence of things.
yeah. And I think another thing is people look at when they have more options to choose from. Like, say they have 5 options that they can choose from. They think that the more options you have, uh, the more free will you have, basically. So I don't know.
And I
That's
don't I don't get that one either because the options of the menu on a restaurant, for example, that's if you call that free will, guess what? That's not something in the person.
right.
That's something on the menu. It's not if you call it free will, it's a free will that's outside of the person that the person doesn't have access to.
Right, and it all stems to this them thinking that they actually have the ability to choose any of those things on the menu, like that they could have chosen pizza when they've chosen something else on the menu. It's like,
They can't choose it unless they want to. Yeah, well, okay, we're a little over 30 minutes. But do you think we covered like the difference between like, this supposed difference between humans and animals, basically? Because I don't think that
Oh
humans,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, because
yeah, yeah. I think it comes down to humans think they're special because of their capacities to rationalize and their capacities to think and deliberate on options that are a little higher than animals. So that's what kind of confuses the issue between the two.
yeah, so I think we pretty much settled that. We agree on that. We're animals.
I've,
Okay.
I just wanted to add that I've been following a dog attack recently in the UK, and there seems to be almost like a 50-50 split if you go by the comments of people blaming the owner and people blaming the dog. So I think people in certain circumstances can kind of they can work out that there's no free will in a certain situation, but then I'm gonna guess that most of the people who want to blame the owner probably think that they also have free will too. So
Now that is interesting, Dave, and I'm going to want to look into that about people blaming dogs and attributing free will to them. Okay, well, I guess I'll end this. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with Chandler Klebs, George Ortega, David Joseph, and Trick Slattery. And we came to the conclusion that we're all animals. Bye.